We'll go ahead and get started. Did anybody have a thought or a question from last week in thinking about the material? Anything that came up?
I found the clarification between mindfulness to come back to the concentration really helpful. I've been practicing it throughout the day when I remember, when I'm mindful. Really good. Very, very good. Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and start then, move into new material. And so before we do that, we'll just set a positive motivation as we did before. So just on our own, again, try to think about earlier in the day when you decided to attend, whatever thoughts motivated that chain of events that brought you here this evening, and a little bit of clarity on that. And then intentionally try to broaden, widen, expand the scope of that motivation. Thinking that we want to try to learn some new technique, some new tool that we can begin to put into practice in order to be of benefit. We can think about friends and family that we come into contact with, and even strangers that we come into contact with, and think that by transforming the mind, we will naturally and spontaneously be more patient, kinder, more at ease, and that others will benefit. So in whatever way you can, try to be determined to use our time to increase your capacity to be helpful, be useful to others. All right, so we're going to take a little bit of a step back to a little bit of a wider view for a moment and discuss, at least historically, again, as I mentioned, last week we all, and just as we just did, we thought about our earlier motivation for attending, and that might be kind of more of our baseline state. We might have to, if that motivation isn't incredibly expansive, isn't, sort of wildly inclusive and compassionate, and if it's more kind of just wanting to be able to get through the day better, then that we might find ourselves starting from that perspective, and that's fine, of course. But we can also talk about the role that meditation plays in historical Buddhism, and just as something perhaps to think about and to play around with as a hypothesis, as something to aspire to, perhaps, or to understand in more detail, and maybe even just come back to later. But what we can say is that because, of course, our center is Tibetan Buddhist center, that we're not necessarily only trying to provide information about meditation in a completely secular context. What people do with their practice is, of course, entirely up to them, but to give information, to give context, we can say that meditation is a tool that the Buddha gave 2600 years ago as an inner technology to really awaken the mind to its greatest potential. And that phrase we can simplify in the word Buddha. In Tibetan, what we say in English as Buddha is, we could say, the awakened one, which is coming from the Sanskrit. And in Tibetan, that word is Sangye, which is similar. It means to be fully perfected and fully developed. So to be rid of all negativity and to have all positive qualities fully developed. So whether we look at the Sanskrit or the Tibetan, the connotation is that any sentient being has the ability to fully develop their own mind and to arise in the state of full enlightenment. That's another way of talking about it. What full enlightenment culminates in, or the flourishing of full enlightenment, the result of it is Buddhahood, or achieving the state of being a Buddha. And that is what meditation, historically, this inner technology leads to, in the way that the Buddha presented it. So what historical Buddhists are trying to do is use this technology to replicate what the Buddha did. And that's really what the Buddha taught. The Buddha himself was at some point an ordinary sentient being, just like ourselves. And he practiced a particular path of growth and development, which culminated in that flourishing of the mind, culminated in his own enlightenment, his own Buddhahood. And then he traveled around and explained to other people what he himself did, so that they could replicate his path, his findings. And that's what, for 2,500 years, what Buddhists have been using meditation to do. And we'll talk a bit about, what that means. We can say, and of course, in the other class, in Buddhism in a Nutshell, we go into more detail about all of those teachings, all about those more detailed philosophical teachings that people are trying to kind of merge their mind with the realizations of the way things are, that Buddhists are trying to kind of steep their mind in, and replicate within themselves. But we can say that using, as we said last week, using these processes of growing in mindfulness and growing in uh, concentration, we apply those skills to positive, constructive objects like love, like compassion, like generosity. And then the mind will naturally be imbued with those qualities in the same way as we said last week, that if we practice anger, if we practice attachment, then the mind will be imbued with those qualities. So then what we can say is that the mind in Buddhism, the mind is said to have really only two fundamental qualities, a clarity or luminosity and an awareness. And when we say clarity or luminosity, we might get the sense, and this is one of the tricky things about, using English words to translate either Sanskrit or Tibetan. The Sanskrit or the Tibetan generally has a lot of rich, nuanced meaning that gets kind of lost by the English. Because when we think of clarity or we think of luminosity, we almost have a sense of a purity. And Buddhism would say that we can talk about that as being accurate in a way, but only in a potential sense, in the sense of, in the way that the mind is operating right now for us. The mind always arises together with a mistaken consciousness, with sort of a fundamental misknowing. The mind and this misknowing, they arise together, they arise simultaneously. And yet the mind is clear and knowing, even though it arises simultaneous with misknowing. So clarity or luminosity really only means, in the more operative sense, it really only means that the mind lacks shape, it lacks color, it's a formless energy. It doesn't mean that the mind is free entirely of afflicted states or mistaken states. We can say at the same time that the Buddhist path that I alluded to is not a path of adding fundamentally, new things to the mind. It is adding new habits, new tendencies, but those habits and those tendencies are, their goal is to act in opposition to that fundamental misknowing. So really what we're trying to do is simply rid the mind of fundamental misknowing. And when we do that, we arise in the state of enlightenment. We become a Buddha, a fully awakened one. So that's the goal. Any thoughts so far? Questions? So of course we can say, that right now, due to fundamental misknowing, it results in a great deal of secondary and tertiary and, and down the line, problems, other faulty and maladaptive, inappropriate ways of relating. It leads to a sense of egotistic, kind of a narrow kind of egotistical way of viewing the world, and then that branches out into impatience, and which gives rise sometimes to anger and all kinds of problems, but really they're all traceable to this fundamental misknowing. And that's the goal of historical Buddhist practice, is that yes, we have kind of coarser antidotes, like, for example, patience. When anger is arising in the mind, we practice patience. We learn to practice patience. When jealousy is arising in the mind, we might learn to practice rejoicing. But these are only kind of tamping down the secondary and tertiary results of fundamental misknowing. They're not getting at fundamental misknowing itself, but they're incredibly important and useful for creating a calmer, more peaceful state of mind where we can begin to access the deeper levels of these states that are present in the mind. And all of this is to say that the inner technology of meditation is in service to that goal from this historical perspective. And it is possible because the mind is not one with, although, as I mentioned, the mind and this fundamental misknowing, they arise simultaneously, but they are not of the same nature. The mind is of the nature of clarity and awareness, and fundamental misknowing just arises simultaneously up until the point where it is completely overcome. And then fundamental misknowing no longer operates in the mind, and the mind is simply clarity and awareness, free of fundamental misknowing, and that is the state of full enlightenment. So in a way, we're not truly adding anything to the mind itself. We're just eliminating this fundamental misknowing, which is presently co-arising with every mental moment of our consciousness. Yeah. So then that gets at another aspect of the mind, which is that the mind, just like the body, the mind is not a monolithic structure. It is comprised of a stream of ever-changing, discrete mental events and mental moments. Just like the body, we also have trouble understanding the body or the mind as being that. We think of the body and the mind as just sort of being one thing. But of course, then when we analyze, we can look at the body and we can say, well, there's thousands of different parts of the body. And if you go, of course, down to the atomic level, then there's an uncountable number of parts. But if you go with the kind of tissue level, then we can talk about, hundreds or even thousands of different individual parts. Each, the hand and the arm, and because we know we can get rid of the right hand and the rest of the body still functions, and so on. We can transplant the heart, the lungs, we can do all of these things, and the body is still able to function. Of course, the body will at some point cease to function, but when it is functioning, it's comprised of a truly huge number of different parts. And the mind is the same. There is, and there's another course that we teach called Discovering Buddhism, where there's a module. Module 1 is mind and mental, mind and its factors, the mind and so, and that's when we go into more detail. If you, and we have a recording of that on the YouTube channel, if you want to look at all of the different parts of the mind in more detail. Module 1 of Discovering Buddhism will do that. That isn't really what we'll do here, but we can say that, sometimes anger arises in the mind, sometimes peacefulness arises in the mind, sometimes the mind is very clear and very focused, other times it's very scattered. So we have all of these changeable states of mind, and sometimes we're more or less operating in one of these states or a different state. And so the mind, in order then for the mind to function, we can think about it in terms of needing an object. The mind is always focused on some sort of object. We have all of the bodily senses that require, the eyes require a physical object to observe, which of course also requires the presence of light. In a complete darkness, our eyes can be open and they technically are functioning, but they're not observing any physical object. Our ears require an auditory object in order to perceive. Our tactile sense requires, and then of course, there's synesthesia, which happens, but where there's the mind is kind of melding things in a way. But Buddhism would suggest that that's not a normal state, that when things are functioning normally, the ear can only apprehend sound, the eyes can only apprehend physical form, the tongue can only apprehend taste, and so on. Things can get confused if there's sort of a disease state where things are, but generally each of the bodily consciousnesses require its own unique object. And then there's the mental sense consciousness, which is different. And this is an important way of distinguishing. We have the 5 bodily sense consciousness and then the mental sense consciousness. And we tend to get those confused because when we apprehend something with our eyes, we then tend to make a judgment about it, thinking of it as beautiful or ugly, pleasant or unpleasant. When we taste something, we do the same thing, but the tongue consciousness or the eye consciousness is not capable. Buddhism would say it's not capable of perceiving something as pleasant or unpleasant. It can only distinguish, salty or sweet, what have you. It's the mental sense consciousness that then comes in and makes a judgment about the bodily sense consciousnesses. So Buddhism would say we have the 5 bodily sense consciousnesses and then the mental sense consciousness. And all of these consciousnesses are leaving imprints within the mind, day by day, moment by moment, habit by habit. And this is important in terms of meditation. We could say that the purpose of meditation is to have time every day where we are intentionally leaving constructive, useful, positive habits or tendencies or imprints in the mind by spending 20 minutes contemplating the advantages of patience or the disadvantages of anger. We have used that time to create constructive, beneficial, useful imprints. And what Buddhism would say about that is that the mind can never occupy two opposing states at the same moment. We can never be full of hate and full of love in the same moment. We can go back and forth. If there's a person that we are close to, and we feel, we would say that we genuinely want them to be happy. We genuinely have a feeling of warmth for them. And then they do something that really deeply upsets us. We can kind of vacillate and feel in one moment really hostile and angry, and then a few minutes later we can kind of recollect that they have many, really helpful, beneficial, constructive qualities, and they are kind and generous, and so that sense of warmth, that sense of wanting them to be happy, then that predominates. But in the same mental moment, we can't feel hostile and loving toward them. So we can use that to think about the role of meditation in a way as crowding out the number of mental moments that we have in a day where that are not constructive, where where anger is arising, where jealousy is arising. The more mental moments that we can have in any given day that are useful, that are beneficial, that are constructive, then we are by definition not having or not putting in those imprints in the mind of jealousy, of hatred, of covetousness, of ill will. And the more that we can kind of snowball that process, then the more that we can really, on a base kind of fundamental level, transform the mind. We would say that an ordinary sentient being and a fully enlightened being are the same except that the ordinary sentient being is just, starting to move their mind in that direction, and the fully enlightened being has finished that process of moving the mind in that direction. But taking advantage of this process of laying down these imprints and using meditation to lay down these imprints is the process by which we will achieve that state. It is the kind of the drop by drop process that results in that state of mind, that state of complete flourishing of our potential. Any thoughts or questions? Yep.
Sometimes I'm a very impatient, crabby driver. So the other day, I'm taking like 7 classes at your center right now, and I'm just like sponging it in. And the other morning, I said, okay, before I go to work, I am going to see all the drivers in front of me and behind me and around me as my dear friends. And I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be relaxed, and I'm not going to think one single negative thought or not utter anything, but I'm not even going to think it. I'm just going to think everybody's my dear friend. And I only drive 10 minutes. And I did it. And I got to my destination, my workplace, and I felt so good. It was really, really wonderful. And then in the afternoon, I forgot. And then I saw the other side of it. I was like, oh, And then but I got it. The mindfulness came in, and I kind of had to giggle to myself and go, oh, my tendencies are just wow, just wow. So I'm working at it. I'm working at it.
Yeah, I mean that's the process is setting that intention and then trying to, I mean, of course, that is the process in daily life. That's the process off the cushion. That these two processes are meant to work in tandem, where of course we're meant to see our whole life as practice, as it's not like there's just formal. I would say that there's formal practice and informal practice. Formal practice is when we are actively in sessions of meditation, and that ideally the purpose of that is that our concentration is getting better, because hopefully we're relatively free of distraction. There's not, we're trying, at least we're putting our phone down, we're trying to tell our loved ones, this is my meditation time, so we're trying to set up a conducive environment, um, and hopefully using that to really develop these skills of concentration and mindfulness, and then hopefully having some insights in those over time, gradually over time, and then those insights are meant to inform our day, as you're saying, like when we're going to work, and because then that's a much more there's a lot going on. The mind is trying to do a whole bunch of different things at once. Um, and so hopefully we're putting into practice the insights that we gain in meditation at that time. And then, of course, the insights that we gain from that help us to figure out what to focus on in meditation, where we need, where our boundaries are, where like, oh, this used to bother me and now it doesn't, but this still bothers me. I've kind of, I can deal with this now, but I see that when this happened, when this person said this, that, you know, that really still triggered me and I was angry about that. So now at the end of the day, we can go back into meditation and we can replay that and we can be like, well, if I was going to be constructive, what would that have looked like? What could I have done? What would it have looked like if I didn't respond with anger? And we can, at the end of the day, imagine constructively responding to that. So it's kind of these two things are mutually reinforcing. We use one to inform the other and the other to inform the other, just every day. It's kind of a cycle. But in terms of when we are in daily life, then catching, as you're saying, catching yourself, and it, just like in meditation, we want to catch ourselves quite quickly, but we find that it's been a couple of minutes. And that also happens in daily life. Ideally, we would like to catch the moment of anger as soon as it arises, but sometimes, oftentimes it might not be until an hour later when we recollect on, or 5, 10 minutes, or whatever it is, after we've kind of calmed down, then we can be like, oh, that wasn't in line with what I want to be like. That, I lost my temper, and and that's still great. We, at least we didn't rejoice in the anger. At least we didn't think it was appropriate. At least we didn't be like, oh, they got what they deserved. And that was the old way of thinking about it, and this is the better new way of thinking about it, is at some point we make a change and um, we do some kind of, we recognize that it was a mistaken action and we engage in some new remedial kind of habit. Um, yeah. Okay. Okay, so now let's introduce another meditative technique. And I know that Lou's familiar with this. I don't know. It's the 9 round breathing meditation, or I mean, it's called a meditation. In a way, it's kind of it's almost a precursor, really, to meditation. Um, it's something that we can use to help. We can use it, on its own, certainly, as kind of a way of clearing the mind. But if the mind feels, if we are going to meditate and the mind feels quite scattered or it feels quite heavy, this can be sort of a preemptive or a precursory way of making the actual session of meditation more constructive. So, of course, we can use it, at work before, a meeting or something, if we want to kind of go into that with a better kind of headspace, we can use it like that. But we can also use it um, to make sessions of meditation more productive if the mind is feeling like it's not quite going to easily slip into a good session on its own, which is a lot of the time. So it's just something that we can do to facilitate good meditation. So there's a number of parts to this. Some are imaginative. Um, it's a very visual meditation, and some is physical. But we'll start with the imaginative part of it, the visualization part. This technique is taken from what's called the Vajrayana tradition, which is a very advanced body of knowledge that is contained within Tibetan Buddhism. It is, you could say, it's also called the esoteric teachings or the secret teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha gave broadly 2 types of teaching. He gave sutra teachings to a very wide audience, and then he gave the esoteric or secret teachings to a select number of very advanced disciples or students. And this is taken from that more advanced body of knowledge, the Vajrayana tradition. Ultimately, the goal of the Vajrayana tradition is to use meditation to gain direct control of the energies that flow in the body and mind naturally. And the purpose of that is to be able to access incredibly subtle and deep states of mind that ordinarily would not be possible. And yeah, but this technique is helping to kind of clear out the mind, kind of make the energies flow in a little bit more of a constructive or beneficial way. Of course, I would say it's true that the better our concentration is, the better our mindfulness is. Just like with any meditation, the better we are at those things, the more effective this meditation is. But that's true of any meditation. If the mind is scattered and distracted, then any meditation that we do won't be as powerful, as beneficial. And that's also true here. But we've got to start somewhere. So what we'll do is we will build the visual part of the meditation, and we'll try to hold that visual part as we engage in the more physical part. So we are going to imagine three tubes of light that are inside our body. We'll start with the first, which is called the central channel. And it begins inside the body at a point between the two eyebrows. This is also the third eye, you could say, but between the two eyebrows, but inside the body. This tube of light is the diameter of your little finger. Our little fingers are all different diameters, but you can kind of look at your own little finger and think that it's about that diameter. So to build this visualization, we think that it starts inside the body in that space, and then it runs up to the top of the back of the head, kind of like an umbrella handle. So it runs up and back to the top of the back of the head, just like sort of a curve, like the handle of an umbrella. And then after it is at the top of the back of the head, then it runs straight in front of the spine, all the way down to a point 4 finger widths below the navel. So starts here, runs up and back, and then straight down, not in the spine, but in front of the spine, and terminates 4 finger widths below the navel. Again, all of our fingers, different widths, but it's roughly, 4 finger widths below the level of the navel, still inside the body. Yeah, so that's the central channel. And then we visualize the right and the left channels. These lateral channels we visualize as slightly smaller in diameter. They say about the size of a drinking straw. And we visualize all of these 3 channels as very soft, very flexible, and kind of luminous. But the left and the right channels, they begin at the left and the right nostrils. So the right channel is your own right nostril. The left channel is your own left nostril, or I should say begins in the left, your own left and right. And then again, so that's the opening point, just like the opening point of the central channel was between the eyebrows. The opening point is within the nostril itself. These 2 also run up and parallel to the central channel. To the central channel. And then again, they just follow just like a longer umbrella curve, handle curve. They also run to the top of the back of the head, and then again straight down. And again, in front of the spine. So they're just parallel to the central channel. And then at this bottommost point, the left and the right kind of curve into the central channel. So they're all joined at the bottommost point 4 finger widths below the navel, with the left and the right kind of curling into the central channel. So that's the visualization. Sometimes this is the way that FPMT describes it for this class. Sometimes in other texts, there are colors and things, but this is just sort of maybe a little bit more simplified. And even within more advanced, there's all kinds of, because again, we're talking about within Vajrayana, there are different texts that describe the subtle energy systems in different ways. And what they say is that different Vajrayana practices are more or less suitable for different individual practitioners, because different individual practitioners just have different energy systems. So we're, again, with the mind being just clarity and awareness, it isn't like we're talking about, flesh and blood things. We're trying to describe an invisible energy sort of conduit, and people have different systems, and that's why you find different ways of describing how to visualize, and one isn't right and one isn't wrong. This is how it's done in this for this class. Is that clear, the visualization?
It's clear for me.
Okay, so so when you're doing the 9-round breathing, you try to hold that visualization as best you can during the whole process. And then there's a physical component to the practice, and that is that we, as I mentioned, it's a sort of a clearing practice. So when we do it, we try to breathe in kind of light or energy that we think of as being pristine or clear, and then we imagine dispelling kind of stale, dark energy from the mind. And we do this in a particular way, which is to take the forefinger of the right hand, and we begin by literally closing the left nostril and only breathing in through the right nostril, which means that we're breathing in this purifying energy only through the right channel. And so then we take a full inhalation with the left nostril closed, visualizing that purifying light and energy is being taken in through the right through the right channel, and is going down and then is entering the central channel. It's filling the central channel from the very bottom. It's creating kind of a pool of energy through, at the very bottom of the central channel with the inhalation. Then the exhalation, we open the left nostril, which was closed, and then we close the right nostril. And we visualize that, and this is at the top of the inhalation, we close the right nostril and we exhale only through the left nostril. And we believe, and we visualize that energy is being taken up now by the left channel. It's coming up and it's being expelled, due to the force of the exhalation, that it's shooting through the right channel. I'm sorry, it's shooting through the left channel and being dispelled. So then we visualize that it's sort of displacing, that this pool of constructive, clean energy that we've created at the bottom of the central channel, where again, the left and the right are hooked into the central channel, that the force of the exhalation is pushing this constructive energy through the left channel, and it's coming out, and we visualize that the stale, dark, energy is being forced out through the left channel. So we do that 3 times. So we close the left nostril, we breathe in, top, we breathe out, we breathe in, we breathe out, we breathe in, we breathe out. That's the first round of 3. So it's purifying in, pool of energy, and then ex- the expelling on the other side. And then you do the reverse for 3. You start by closing the right nostril. You're breathing in through the left nostril. You are filling the left nostril with purifying energy and creating this pool of energy at the bottom of the central channel. And then the exhalation is forcing it out through the other channel. So it's coming in and coming out. If you would like, you can there's no kind of wrong way to do the visualization. If you would like, you can kind of think of it almost like water, in a way, like the you can think of it as like the if you're starting with the right nostril, you can think of that tube as like containing the stale energy, already, like before you start. So you think of it as kind of like gunked up and kind of muddy. And then the inhalation is kind of forcing that to the bottom. And then, or I'm sorry, the inhalation is kind of just pushing that to the bottom. And then the exhalation is again just shooting it. So kind of like, running water through pipes. You can kind of think of it in that way. If you connect with that, if that's helpful. So those are the first 2 sets of 3. So 3 inhalations through the right, 3 exhalations through the left, and then 3 inhalations through the left, 3 exhalations through the right. And then there's 3 where you do not close either nostril, and you breathe in normally through both simultaneously, and then you're filling the central channel with that, and then when you exhale, you actually visualize that dark, stale energy is flowing out through, you could say your third eye, basically coming out through the forehead, because that's where the opening of the central channel is. So it's just being dispelled outward. And if you like, you don't have to visualize any stale. You can, you don't have to include a visualization of stale energy. You can just kind of think of it as just the pure energy kind of moving through. It's really up to you. That, as I mentioned, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Except that you do want to bring in positive energy, and then, kind of think of it as moving through in that way. So it's called the 9 round because it's 3 sets of 3. Those 3 sets, and you can do 1 set of the 9 rounds. You can do 2 sets of the 9 rounds. At a certain point, maybe it's stops being productive to just do it for a long time. I would say 5 minutes or less is probably good. Yeah. Any questions or thoughts before we do that together and then see how that goes for folks? No. All right. So again, the visualization is what we try to maintain an awareness of. So we'll start by again building that visualization of the central channel and the left and the right channels simultaneously, all 3. I just try to think of these thin, flexible, luminous kind of energy conduits. I'm going to try to hold that. All right. And then we take our right index finger and gently, very gently close the left nostril. And breathe in through the right, nice and slow. And then at the top, we switch and just breathe out normally. And then after 3 of that, then we do the reverse. Close the right, breathe in through the left. And then once you've done 3 of those, the last set of 3 is to breathe in naturally through both nostrils. And then we'll just do it once more on your own, nice and slow. Just on your own time. All right. And if you would, as I said, you kind of feel, whatever sort of rhythm works best just for your own mind. If you feel that it works better to visualize that the channel that is dispelling the energy is like completely already filled at the top of the inhalation, and it's just sort of totally ready to be let go of. You can do that. You don't have to. It's I don't know if that works. Probably is going to work better for some people to think of it that way. The way that I described it is just kind of how I think of it, but I don't know that that's best for all people. To kind of think of the exhalation as sort of sucking up and then expelling, or to think of it as like moving from one and then just totally filling the other, and then this one's just full and it's ready to. That's another way you could do it. You know, whatever you gravitate to is fine. There's no, again, no wrong way to do it. Any thoughts or questions about that? Yeah.
Okay, can I just physically
Hmm.
draw a line? So I'm breathing in the right, and it's going up to the back of the head, and then it comes down in front of the spine and goes down to the hara. I call it the hara. I lived in Japan. And it then fills the central channel. And sorry, I've got mosquitoes. Does the central channel fill up all the way to the forehead?
Um, so if it depends on which, um, where, if you're doing the first
Yes,
round,
the first round.
it doesn't really, I'm not sure that it matters.
Okay.
Because the main thing that you're visualizing is that if you're breathing in through the right, the main
Mm-hmm.
thing that you're visualizing is that the left channel is the one that's filled. You're not technically visualizing, or it's not important to visualize the central channel as
Oh,
full until you get to the third where you're expelling
thank
from the central channel. You
got it.
can if you want to, think that the right is totally filling the central channel, and then it's just. But then, I mean,
Cleansing out the left.
yeah, I mean, in a way, I'm not really sure, because then in a way you're kind of, I mean, that's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit
Yeah,
more
it's a lot.
advanced, because then you're sort of activating the downward voiding wind. Because I mean, that would
Mm-hmm.
sort of be what you would be doing, is kind of visualizing that from the top down, because then you're sort of pushing it out from the top in order for it to, because the opening of the left is at the bottom, and in order,
Mm-hmm.
if you visualize the central is full, really kind of what you're activating is what they would call the downward voiding wind, which is one of the main winds. And I don't know, I mean, I'm just not sure if that's the
Okay.
goal or not.
So,
um so,
let me clarify. So I breathe up the right nostril
mhm.
here, and I go down to the hara, and I pool down at the hara, and then I
Or
breathe out the left. So
mhm.
that comes up the front of the spine and up to the back of the head and in front of the spine. I do body work, so I used to teach anatomy. So I'm like really precise about feeling stuff inside. So then it comes and it cleanses out the left nostril.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's great.
so as I said, you can, if you want, you can visualize it as like fully filling the left with the inhalation, like it's because they're all connected at the bottom. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to hold the pool there.
Oh,
If you,
it can just
yeah,
fill that
it
all
can,
up.
like water, like it's a hose, and
Right, and
it's
it
just sort
just
of like, it's
fills
just
up.
sort of, yeah, you
But
can.
the exhalation is then cleansing that out.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other? Yep.
Um, I have trouble with this one. I never did in the beginning, but then I had skin cancer on my nose, and they had to like pull my cheek over my nose, and now this side here collapses when I breathe in on it. So I almost have to like hold it open. It's just an extra step. I don't know if that interferes with it.
I mean, they say that if you don't want to physically close, you don't have to. You can just do the vision. You can breathe normally and just focus. Because really, what they say, because as I mentioned, this is in a way related to energy, work and what they say, because in a way it's not dealing so much with the chakras, because the chakras are places where the three channels kind of wrap around, and there's different kind of psychic structures that are visualized. It's more complicated, but it is dealing with the three main channels, and they're kind of all kind of branch channels and things. But the what underlies that kind of visualization is actually the visualization. They say that for advanced meditators, they let go of actually closing the nostrils because it's not necessary. Because where the mind goes, what the mind attends to is where the mind, because which is related again to the chakra. Like when they talk about opening the channel knots and things, that's literally um, just concentrating on that particular spot is that's what they call like penetrating the heart chakra, or penetrating it's literally just the fact that we're concentrating on that spot. So the physical closing is really, it can be helpful, but you can just do it where you are, yes, you're breathing in through both, but in your concentration, it's the visualization is only happening in the correct place. Um,
Okay.
and that's fine. That's a fine way to do it.
Okay, that's good because like I said, this thing, I have to pop it back open again.
Yeah. All right.
So do you call the Shushumna and the Ida and the Pingala? Is that what the Tibetans call them, or not
I'm
using
not
the?
I'm not sure what the
Oh,
Tibetan is for central and right and left.
oh,
We
it's
always
okay. I'm not trying to learn Tibetan.
Yeah, no, I always just use the English, just central and right and left.
Okay.
Okay. So we've got a little bit of time. So we'll talk a little bit about, well, I don't know. Do you want to do, we could just end with another meditation rather than going into another philosophical topic. Is that what you guys would? Okay. So we'll end with, so if we want to take like a 90-second break, let's do that. Let's take like a 90-second or little break. You can maybe stretch a little bit. All right, and now let's try to, now that we'll be doing a more formal meditation, let's try to get into a stable posture. So we try to think about some of those points of the posture: a straight back, an open torso, hands in the lap, right over left with the palms upturned and the thumbs gently touching, the eyes being gently closed or slightly open, gaze being unfocused and slightly downward, trying to avoid slouching or leaning. And we have a sense of pulling away from attending to the outside world, allowing our environment to be as it is. No need to investigate, no need to send our awareness out. Just holding our awareness to the body and mind, attending closely to the physical sensation of the air moving into and back out the tip of the nostrils. Trying to notice quickly when anything other than that one physical sensation is arising in the mind, and without judgment or frustration, lifting our awareness up from this distraction and placing it gently but firmly again and again on that physical sensation of the air moving into and back out of the tip of the nostrils. And then just briefly reassert that altruistic motivation we established in the beginning. And then allow your mind to become an observer of those mental moments, that flow, that river of mental moments, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, memories, imaginations. Whatever is naturally arising in the mind, just observe. Like watching traffic from a window. Not energizing particular objects of awareness and not rejecting particular objects of awareness. Just noticing as each object arises and passes away in the mind. And then begin to notice the quiet spaces in between individual objects of awareness. trying to focus more in these moments of clarity, openness, spaciousness. Allowing each individual object of awareness to infer the existence of the open spaciousness of the mind itself. Just like each cloud in the sky infers the existence of the sky itself. Without the open spaciousness of the mind, these objects couldn't exist. So try to focus on and elongate those quiet moments, resting in the spaciousness of the mind. And when you're ready, we'll come back together. I meant implies, not infers. It's a different word. And also the DB module it's mind and its potential. Mind and mental factors is a basic program class that broadly covers the same material, but it's more, so it's mind and its potential is the DB class that I meant to talk about. Any questions, thoughts, questions?
I'm a longtime Zazen practitioner, and when we do our mudra, we put the left on top of the right, and you say put the right on top of the left. Is there a meaning?
I mean, broadly, the meaning, the idea is that it completes an energy circuit in the kind of between. It helps the energies to flow better, to have a completed energy circuit. I and and they talk about the different energies being like, I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure if I remember exactly, but like that the energies are associated, that the mind rides on the energies of the body, and that the energies in different parts of the body are correlated with different states of mind. And so you're kind of trying to balance that out in a way. But I don't know. And it is always, I mean, in Tibetan Buddhism, it is always right over left. And maybe that has something to do with like subduing something rather, subduing, using one energy to subdue another in a way, rather than, I don't know. To me, and I'm not sure why, but left over right just feels awkward in my hands. So, but maybe that's just because I've never done it.
Yeah.
But so yeah, but it's always right over left. I don't
Thank
know.
you.
Any other questions? All right, so we got 2 more classes. We'll pick it back up next week, and we'll start with talking about different types of meditation.